The vote was unanimous, Catherine. You're out, effective immediately. The boardroom falls silent as security guards appear in the doorway. The billionaire CEO who once commanded respect from Wall Street now faces complete professional destruction. But the night janitor who witnessed her downfall is about to make a decision that will shock everyone in that room and change both their lives forever. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The elevator doors slid open on the 38th floor of Sterling Holdings at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Marcus Thompson stepped into the darkened hallway, his security key card still warm from the scanner downstairs. The cleaning cart wheels squeaked softly against the marble floor as he moved toward the executive offices, but something was different tonight. A sliver of light cut through the darkness from beneath the corner office door. Marcus paused, checking his watch again. The building should have been empty hours ago, yet there was movement behind the frosted glass. He'd been working nights at Sterling Holdings for 3 years, long enough to know that executives didn't stay this late unless something was seriously wrong. He knocked gently on the door frame. "Hello?" "Security check. Is everything all right in there?" The response was muffled but distinctly female. "Go away." Buildings closed. Marcus recognized the voice immediately. Catherine Sterling, the 32-year-old CEO who had inherited the company from her father 2 years ago. She was brilliant, demanding, and according to office gossip, completely isolated in her personal life. He'd seen her in passing during his shifts, always impeccably dressed, always moving with purpose, always alone. "Miss Sterling, it's Marcus from the night maintenance crew. I just need to make sure you're safe." A crash came from inside the office, followed by what sounded like papers scattering across the floor. Marcus tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Catherine Sterling sat on the carpet beside her overturned desk chair, surrounded by financial documents and an empty bottle of expensive scotch. Her usually perfect blonde hair fell in disheveled waves around her shoulders, and her tailored blazer was wrinkled and stained. She looked up at Marcus with eyes that were both defiant and utterly lost. "Well, well," she said, her words slightly slurred, "if it isn't my favorite ghost. The man who cleans up after everyone's messes." She gestured vaguely at the scattered papers. "Think you can clean up this one?" Marcus set his card aside and knelt beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Up close, he could see that her makeup was smeared, revealing exhaustion lines that expensive concealer usually hid. "Are you hurt, Ms. Sterling?" She laughed, but it came out hollow and bitter. "Hurt? No, Marcus, I'm destroyed. There's a difference." She held up a crumpled document. "Board meeting tomorrow." "Well, today, technically. They're voting on my removal as CEO. Turns out my own board thinks I'm incompetent." Marcus had heard whispers about internal conflicts at Sterling Holdings, but seeing the usually commanding Catherine in this state was jarring. "Have you called anyone? Family? Friends? Family?" Catherine's laugh turned sharper. "My father's been dead for 2 years, and my mother moved to Monaco to avoid being associated with his failure of a daughter." "Friends?" She shook her head slowly. "When you're the boss, Marcus, you don't have friends. You have employees and enemies. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is which." The vulnerability in her voice caught Marcus off guard. In 3 years of working in the same building, he'd never heard her speak like this, never seen her as anything other than the ice queen of corporate America. "What about calling a cab? You shouldn't drive in your condition." "My condition," she repeated, studying the empty bottle. "You mean drunk and pathetic?" "Because that's what I am, Marcus. Drunk, pathetic, and about to lose everything my father built." She tried to stand and immediately swayed, catching herself against the desk. "The last Sterling to run Sterling Holdings, and I'm going to lose it to a hostile takeover because I'm too weak to fight them." Marcus stood and gently steadied her elbow. "You're not weak, Ms. Sterling. You're having a bad night. There's a difference." She looked at him with surprise, as if hearing her own words echoed back had startled her. "Why are you being kind to me? I don't even know your last name." "Thompson," Marcus said quietly. And I'm being kind because everyone deserves kindness when they're at their lowest point. Catherine studied his face for a long moment. Marcus was probably 40, maybe 42, with kind brown eyes, and the kind of steady presence that came from weathering life's storms. There was something about him that felt safe, which was unusual for her. She'd built her entire life around not needing to feel safe. "Thompson," she repeated. "Do you have somewhere to be, Thompson? Someone waiting for you at home?" Marcus thought of his 8-year-old daughter Emma, asleep in her bed 3 floors up in their small apartment building 20 minutes away. "My daughter's with a sitter. She's used to me working late." "A daughter?" Catherine's expression softened slightly. "How old?" "8. Emma. She's—" Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's my everything." Something flickered across Catherine's face, an emotion Marcus couldn't quite identify. What happened to her mother? "Car accident when Emma was 2. Drunk driver ran a red light." The words came out matter-of-factly, but Catherine heard the carefully controlled pain beneath them. "I raised Emma alone since then." Catherine was quiet for a moment, swaying slightly as she absorbed this information. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was. It is. But you adapt. You learn that you're stronger than you thought you were." Marcus glanced around the office, taking in the luxury that surrounded them. "Looks like you might be learning the same thing." "Strength," Catherine laughed bitterly again. "You think losing a company is strength? I think facing your problems instead of running from them is strength, and right now, you need to get home safely so you can face tomorrow." Catherine looked at the empty bottle, then at the scattered papers, then back at Marcus. "I can't drive. My car's in the garage downstairs, but I can barely stand. I'll call you a cab." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "The press will be watching. They're like vultures, especially when they smell blood in the water. If they see me being poured into a taxi at midnight, drunk off my ass, it'll be front-page news tomorrow. The board will use it as additional evidence of my unfitness to lead." Marcus considered this. The media scrutiny that came with her position was something he'd never had to think about, but he could see how it would complicate even the simplest decisions. What about a driver? Don't executives usually have drivers? Richard gets off at 6, and I specifically didn't want witnesses to my pathetic breakdown tonight. Catherine tried to lean against her desk and missed, stumbling slightly. Marcus caught her arm again, and this time she didn't pull away. "I could drive you," he offered quietly. "I have a car, and I know how to be discreet." Catherine blinked at him in surprise. "You'd do that? Drive your drunk boss home like some kind of chauffeur?" "I'd help someone who needs help get home safely." The boss thing is just coincidence. For the first time that night, Catherine's smile looked genuine. "You're either very kind or very naive, Thompson." "Maybe both," Marcus admitted, "but I can't leave you here like this." Catherine looked around her office one more time, taking in the chaos she'd created. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting, probably her termination, definitely the end of everything she'd worked for. But right now, there was this unexpected kindness from a man who had no reason to care about her problems. "All right," she said finally, "but I need to clean this up first. Can't leave evidence of my meltdown for the cleaning crew to find." She paused, realizing the irony. "No offense." "None taken. And don't worry about the mess. I'll take care of it when I come back." Marcus helped Catherine gather the most important documents while she swayed and occasionally gripped his shoulder for balance. Her expensive perfume was mixed with the scent of scotch, creating an oddly vulnerable combination that made Marcus think of his daughter after a nightmare, when she needed someone to be strong for her. "Where do you live?" he asked, as they waited for the elevator. "Beacon Hill." Louisburg Square. She named one of Boston's most exclusive addresses as casually as someone might mention the corner store. Marcus nodded, though privately he wondered if his 10-year-old Honda would look conspicuous in that neighborhood. "That's not too far." The elevator ride down was quiet except for the soft music and Catherine's occasional deep breaths as she tried to compose herself. In the garage, Marcus led her to his car, opening the passenger door with the same courtesy he'd show anyone, though he noticed Catherine seemed surprised by the gesture. "When was the last time someone opened a car door for you?" he asked, as she settled into the passenger seat. Catherine thought about it as Marcus walked around to the driver's side. "I honestly can't remember. My father used to when I was little, before he decided I needed to be tougher." "Being tough and accepting help aren't mutually exclusive," Marcus said, starting the engine. "Emma taught me that. She's the toughest kid I know, but she still lets me carry her when she's tired." As they drove through the empty Boston streets, Catherine found herself stealing glances at Marcus. His hands were steady on the wheel, and he drove with the careful attention of someone who couldn't afford accidents or traffic tickets. There was something calming about his presence, the way he didn't try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter or judgment about her condition. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said as they turned onto Beacon Street. "Sure. Why do you work nights? With a daughter, I mean. Seems like it would be harder." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Better pay, for one thing. Night shift gets a differential, and Emma's asleep anyway, so I'm not missing much time with her. Mrs. Rodriguez next door watches her when I'm working. It's not perfect, but it works. That must be exhausting." "Sometimes. But you do what you have to do for the people you love." Catherine absorbed this as they pulled onto Louisburg Square. The historic brownstones stood like sentinels in the darkness, their windows mostly dark at this late hour. "That one," she said, pointing to an elegant four-story building. "The one with the blue door." Marcus parked and came around to help her out of the car. Catherine had sobered up slightly during the drive, but she still moved carefully as they approached her front door. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before Marcus gently took them and unlocked the door for her. "Thank you," she said, standing in the doorway. "Really? You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Marcus replied simply. "Take care of yourself, Ms. Sterling. And drink some water before you go to bed." Catherine watched him walk back to his car, this man who had shown her more genuine kindness in one night than she'd experienced in months. As his taillights disappeared around the corner, she realized she didn't even know if he had a first name, beyond what she'd heard other employees call him. To her, he'd always just been Thompson from maintenance. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Tomorrow would bring consequences she wasn't ready to face, but tonight had brought something unexpected, a reminder that there were still people in the world who helped others without expecting anything in return. Marcus drove home through the quiet streets, his mind replaying the evening's events. In 3 years, he'd exchanged perhaps 20 words with Catherine Sterling, and tonight he'd driven her home drunk and vulnerable. It felt surreal, like he'd stepped into someone else's life for a few hours. At home, he paid Mrs. Rodriguez and checked on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her bed, her stuffed elephant clutched tightly in her arms. Standing in the doorway of her room, Marcus felt the familiar weight of single parenthood, the constant awareness that every decision he made affected not just him, but this perfect little person who depended on him completely. He thought about Catherine's isolation, her admission that she had no one to call when everything fell apart. Money couldn't buy the kind of security he felt looking at his sleeping daughter, knowing that whatever challenges they faced them together. Before bed, Marcus returned to Sterling Holdings to finish his shift and clean up Catherine's office, as promised. As he gathered the scattered papers and righted the overturned chair, he wondered what would happen to her tomorrow, whether she'd remember his kindness or feel embarrassed by her vulnerability. He never expected that his phone would buzz with a text message at 3:17 in the morning from a number he didn't recognize, with words that would change everything about the careful balance he'd built between his two worlds. The soft vibration pulled Marcus from the edge of sleep. He'd been lying awake thinking about Catherine's situation, wondering if she'd remember their conversation or regret showing such vulnerability to an employee. The glowing screen cast blue light across his small bedroom as he reached for the phone. The message was from an unknown number, but the words made his heart skip. Thompson, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about what you said tonight about being stronger than you think you are. I've been weak for so long I forgot what strength looked like until you showed me. Thank you for seeing me as a person instead of just a problem. I know this is inappropriate, but I needed you to know that your kindness meant everything tonight. Don't worry about work tomorrow. Whatever happens in that meeting, you'll always have a job as long as I have any say in it. You're a good man, Marcus Thompson. Your daughter is lucky to have you. Catherine Marcus read the message 3 times, his thumb hovering over the keyboard as he tried to process the unexpected intimacy of her words. She'd called him Marcus, not Thompson. She'd opened herself in a way that felt both grateful and dangerous, crossing lines that existed for good reasons. He thought about Emma sleeping down the hall, about the careful stability he'd built for them both. Getting involved with his boss, especially one fighting for her professional life, was exactly the kind of complication he couldn't afford. But there was something in Catherine's message that spoke to the part of him that remembered what it felt like to be completely alone, drowning in circumstances beyond his control. After Emma's mother died, he'd been where Catherine was tonight, sitting on his apartment floor, surrounded by medical bills and insurance forms, an empty bottle of beer in his hand, wondering how he was going to survive the next day, let alone the next 18 years. The difference was that he'd had Emma to fight for. Catherine, it seemed, had no one. Marcus typed and deleted several responses before settling on something simple. Get some sleep, Catherine. Tomorrow is a new day, and you're stronger than you know. You proved that tonight by facing your problems instead of running from them. Whatever happens, you'll figure it out. Good people always do. He hesitated before hitting send, knowing that responding would acknowledge the shift in their relationship from employer and employee to something more personal. But leaving her message unanswered felt cruel, especially when she'd reached out from such a vulnerable place. After sending the text, Marcus lay back down, but sleep eluded him. His mind kept circling back to the image of Catherine on her office floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her professional life, admitting that she had no one to call. The loneliness in her voice had been unmistakable, the kind of isolation that money couldn't fix and success couldn't heal. At 5:30, his alarm went off, and Marcus began his usual morning routine. Emma would wake up in an hour, and he needed coffee and a clear head to navigate the day ahead. As he showered, he wondered what kind of reception he'd receive at work that evening. Would Catherine remember their conversation and feel embarrassed? Would she pretend it never happened? Would she even still be CEO by the time his shift started? Emma appeared in the kitchen at 6:15, her hair sticking up in impossible directions and her favorite stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. "Morning, Daddy," she said, climbing onto her usual stool at the counter. "Morning, sunshine. Ready for another day of conquering second grade?" Emma giggled, a sound that never failed to brighten Marcus's mood no matter what else was happening in his life. "Mrs. Patterson says we're going to learn about community helpers today. I told her my daddy helps people at work, but she wanted to know what kind of help." Marcus paused in the middle of pouring Emma's orange juice. "How did you explain to an 8-year-old that you cleaned up after people who made more money in a month than you made in a year, that you were invisible to most of the people whose offices you maintained?" "Well," he said carefully, "I make sure people have a clean, safe place to work." "That's important, don't you think?" Emma nodded seriously. "Like how I clean my room so my toys have a good place to live?" "Exactly like that." Marcus smiled, struck once again by his daughter's ability to find the essential truth in complicated situations. "You understand things very well, Em." As they ate breakfast together, Marcus found himself thinking about the contrast between this warm, simple moment and the complexity of Catherine's world. Emma chattered about her friends and her upcoming art project, secure in the knowledge that her father would pick her up from school, help with homework, and be there for bedtime stories. It was a kind of wealth that had nothing to do with bank accounts or stock portfolios. At 7:45, Marcus walked Emma to school, savoring their morning ritual of counting red cars and spotting interesting clouds. At the school gate, she hugged him tightly before running off to join her friends, her backpack bouncing with each step. Marcus spent the day doing odd jobs for neighbors and apartment building maintenance work, keeping busy enough to avoid dwelling on the evening ahead. But as 5 o'clock approached, he found himself increasingly anxious about returning to Sterling Holdings. The professional boundary he'd maintained for 3 years had been irreversibly crossed, and he wasn't sure what that meant for either of them. Marcus arrived at Sterling Holdings that evening with unusual nervousness knotting his stomach. The security guard nodded as he passed through the lobby, same as always, but everything felt different now. He'd crossed an invisible line the night before, and there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity he'd maintained for 3 years. The 38th floor was buzzing with activity, despite the late hour. Lights blazed in multiple offices, and Marcus could hear the low murmur of intense conversations through closed doors. The board meeting had clearly happened, but he had no way of knowing the outcome without compromising his position further. He began his cleaning routine on the lower floors, working his way up as usual, but his attention kept drifting to the executive level. Around 9:30, he finally made his way to Catherine's floor, pushing his cart with deliberate casualness as he approached her office. The door was open, and Catherine was inside, but she wasn't alone. 3 men in expensive suits surrounded her desk, their voices raised in what was clearly a heated discussion. Marcus recognized one of them as Richard Blackwood, the head of the board's hostile faction who'd been pushing for Catherine's removal. "The vote was unanimous, Catherine," Blackwood was saying, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who'd just won a long battle. "You're out." Effective immediately. Marcus froze in the hallway, suddenly understanding why the building was so active. Catherine had lost. The woman who'd trusted him with her vulnerability just hours ago had been stripped of everything she'd worked for. "I built this company's current success," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Revenue is up 40% since I took over. Stock price has doubled." "Numbers aren't everything," another board member interjected. "Leadership requires stability, confidence from the investment community. Your personal issues have become a liability." Marcus felt a surge of anger on Catherine's behalf. These men were dismantling her achievements, while she sat there taking it with professional dignity. He wanted to march in and defend her, but that would only make things worse for both of them. "I'll need time to transition my projects," Catherine said calmly. "David Morrison will handle the transition. Your access to company systems has already been revoked." Blackwood's voice held barely concealed satisfaction. "Security will escort you out once you've gathered your personal items." The casual cruelty of it hit Marcus like a physical blow. This woman had poured her life into Sterling Holdings, and they were treating her like a criminal. He retreated to the supply closet, not wanting to witness her humiliation, but unable to leave her completely alone. 20 minutes later, the board members filed past his location, their conversation turning to golf plans and weekend trips as if they hadn't just destroyed someone's career. Marcus waited until they were gone before emerging from the closet. Catherine's office door was still open, and she sat alone at her desk, methodically placing personal items into a cardboard box. Her movements were controlled, professional, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she kept her expression neutral. She'd rebuilt the mask that had slipped the night before. Marcus knocked softly on the door frame. "Miss Sterling?" She looked up, and for a moment her composure cracked. Relief, embarrassment, and something that might have been gratitude flashed across her face before she regained control. "Thompson, I wasn't sure you'd be working tonight." "Regular schedule," he said, stepping into the office. "I heard voices earlier." "Everything all right?" Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Define all right. I've just been relieved of my position as CEO. Apparently, my leadership style is too unstable for the board's comfort." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists at his sides. "That's ridiculous. You've turned this company around, have I?" Catherine continued packing, not meeting his eyes. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am unstable. Maybe last night proved that I'm not fit to lead a major corporation. Last night proved that you're human, Marcus said firmly. Being human isn't a disqualification for leadership. It should be a requirement. Catherine paused in her packing, finally looking at him directly. You really believe that, don't you? I've worked for a lot of bosses, Ms. Sterling. The best ones were the ones who remembered they were people first. Marcus moved closer to her desk. What you're going through, it's not about your abilities. It's about power and money, and men who can't handle a woman being more successful than they are. Something flickered in Catherine's eyes, a spark of the fight that had built Sterling Holdings into what it was today. You know, Thompson, for a maintenance worker, you have remarkable insight into corporate politics. For a CEO, you have remarkable humanity. Don't let them take that away from you. They were interrupted by the appearance of two security guards in the doorway. Miss Sterling, the older guard said respectfully, I'm sorry, but we need to escort you from the building. Catherine closed the box and stood, straightening her jacket with practiced composure. Of course. Thank you for being courteous about it, Jim. As she gathered her things, Marcus made a decision that would complicate his life in ways he couldn't imagine. Miss Sterling, if you need anything at all, you have my number. She paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't read. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. And please call me Catherine. I'm not your boss anymore. Marcus watched her walk away between the security guards, her spine straight and her head high despite the humiliation. She'd been stripped of her title, her office, her life's work, but she hadn't been broken. There was steel in Catherine Sterling that went deeper than any corporate position. The next few days passed quietly for Marcus. He heard through building gossip that Catherine had cleaned out her private office and submitted her resignation letter, though everyone knew she'd been forced out. David Morrison, the new CEO, had already begun making changes, bringing in his own people and systematically dismantling many of Catherine's initiatives. Marcus found himself thinking about Catherine constantly, wondering how she was handling the transition, whether she'd found another position, if she was taking care of herself. The text message she'd sent that first night had created a connection between them that didn't disappear just because she no longer worked in the building. On Thursday evening, as Marcus was finishing his shift, his phone buzzed with a message from Catherine's number. I know this is presumptuous, but would you like to have coffee tomorrow? I could use some of that perspective you mentioned. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Meeting Catherine outside of work would cross yet another line, moving them from the safe territory of employer-employee interaction into something more personal and potentially complicated. But the loneliness in her text was unmistakable, and he remembered his own dark days after losing Emma's mother, when a kind word or human connection had been the difference between surviving and thriving. He typed back, Coffee sounds good. I know a place in Charlestown that's quiet. Emma gets out of school at 3:15, so any time before 2:30 works. Her response came quickly. Perfect. Send me the address. And Marcus? Thank you for not pretending last week didn't happen. Friday afternoon found Marcus arriving at Murphy's Coffee House 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table where they could talk without being overheard. Charlestown was far enough from the financial district that they were unlikely to encounter anyone from Catherine's former corporate circle. Catherine arrived precisely on time, and Marcus was struck by how different she looked outside the corporate environment. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in her usual severe style. She looked younger, more approachable, but also somehow more fragile without the armor of her business suits. This is nice, she said, settling into the chair across from him. I haven't been in a place like this in years. Everything in my world is either boardrooms or five-star restaurants or charity galas where the coffee costs $20 a cup. Marcus smiled. Murphy makes the best coffee in the city, and it's $3. Sometimes the simple things are the best things. They ordered, and for a few minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon foot traffic through the windows. Catherine seemed to be absorbing the normalcy of the moment, the absence of pressure and performance that had defined her life for so long. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked finally. Catherine considered the question seriously. "Better than I expected, actually. The first few days were terrible. I kept waking up and reaching for my phone to check the overnight markets, planning my day around meetings that didn't exist anymore. But yesterday, I slept until 9, and you know what? The world didn't end." "Sounds like your body was telling you something." "That I was exhausted," Catherine admitted. "I haven't taken a real vacation in 3 years. I worked weekends, holidays, carried my phone everywhere. I told myself it was necessary, that the company needed that level of dedication. Maybe it did for a while. But sustainable success comes from sustainable habits. You can't run a marathon at a sprint pace." Catherine studied him over her coffee cup. "How did you get so wise, Marcus Thompson?" "Hard experience and an 8-year-old who asks difficult questions." Marcus's smile was fond. "Emma has a way of cutting through nonsense and getting to what really matters." "Tell me about her," Catherine said, and Marcus heard genuine interest in her voice, not just polite conversation. For the next hour, Marcus shared stories about Emma's adventures, her personality quirks, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian who specialized in helping stuffed animals. Catherine listened with the focus she'd once brought to merger negotiations, asking thoughtful questions and laughing at Emma's more precocious observations. "She sounds extraordinary," Catherine said finally. "You're lucky to have each other." "We are. It wasn't always easy after her mother died, but Emma kept me grounded, gave me something to focus on besides my own grief." Marcus hesitated, then decided to risk honesty. "I imagine it's harder when you don't have that kind of anchor. When the only thing grounding you is work, and then work disappears." Catherine's eyes grew thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that a lot this week. What do I do now? Who am I without Sterling Holdings? I defined myself entirely through that company for so long that I'm not sure there's anything else left." "There's plenty left," Marcus said firmly. "I saw it that night in your office. The real you, underneath all the corporate expectations. You're smart, compassionate, stronger than you know. You just need to figure out what you want to build next." "What if I don't know what I want?" "Then you have time to figure it out. That's a luxury most people never get." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What do you want, Marcus? If you could do anything, be anything, what would it be?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd spent so many years focused on immediate needs and Emma's future that he'd stopped thinking about his own dreams. "I used to want to teach," he said slowly. "History, maybe high school level. I like the idea of helping kids understand how the past connects to their present, how they can learn from other people's mistakes and successes." "What stopped you?" "Life. Emma's mother got sick, medical bills piled up, then she died, and I needed stable income with good benefits immediately. Teaching requires time and money for certification that I didn't have." "But you could have it now. Emma's older, more independent. You could go back to school part-time." Marcus shook his head. "It's not that simple. I'm 42, Catherine. Starting over at my age, with my responsibilities, it's not realistic." "Says who?" Catherine's voice carried a hint of the executive steel that had built her career. "You just told me that people are stronger than they know, that sustainable success comes from sustainable habits. Maybe it's time to practice what you preach." Marcus was about to respond when his phone buzzed with a text from Emma's school. His expression changed immediately as he read the message, concern replacing the thoughtful conversation they'd been having. "Everything all right?" Catherine asked, noticing his shift in demeanor. "Emma's sick. Fever and stomach bug. I need to pick her up from school." Marcus was already standing, reaching for his jacket. "I'm sorry, I have to go." "Of course. Is there anything I can do to help?" Marcus paused, surprised by the offer. "No, but thank you. It's probably just a 24-hour thing. Kids bounce back fast." "Text me later? Let me know how she's doing?" The genuine concern in Catherine's voice caught Marcus off guard. Most people offered help as a social courtesy, not expecting to be taken up on it, but Catherine seemed to actually care about the answer. "I will," he promised, then hurried out to collect his daughter. Emma was indeed miserable when Marcus arrived at the school nurse's office. Her usually bright eyes were dull with fever, and she clung to him with the desperate need of a sick child who just wanted her parent. The nurse explained that several children had come down with the same bug, and it would likely run its course in a day or two. At home, Marcus settled Emma on the couch with her favorite blanket and stuffed elephant, taking her temperature and making sure she stayed hydrated. Between doses of children's fever reducer and sips of ginger ale, Emma dozed fitfully while Marcus worked from his laptop, handling the paperwork for his various part-time jobs. Around 6 in the evening, his phone rang. Catherine's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus felt an unexpected flutter of nerves as he answered. "Hi, Catherine." "How's Emma feeling?" she asked immediately. No pleasantries or small talk. "Better. The fever broke about an hour ago, and she managed to keep down some toast. Thanks for asking." "I'm glad. Listen, I know this might sound strange, but I was at the grocery store, and I remembered my nanny used to make this incredible chicken soup when I was sick as a child. I thought maybe Emma might like some. I could bring it over, or leave it outside your door if you'd prefer." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing the offer. Catherine Sterling, former CEO of a major corporation, was offering to make soup for his sick daughter. "You made soup?" Catherine laughed, and Marcus could hear embarrassment in her voice. "Well, I bought the ingredients and followed a recipe. It's probably not as good as your nanny's version, but it smells right." "That's incredibly thoughtful, Catherine." "Emma would love that, and honestly, I could use the company. It's been a long day." 20 minutes later, Catherine appeared at Marcus's apartment door carrying a large container of what smelled like the most delicious chicken soup he'd encountered in years. She'd changed from her coffee shop attire into even more casual clothes, yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt that made her look younger and more approachable than Marcus had ever seen her. "This is beautiful," she said, looking around his modest apartment. The space was small but warm, filled with Emma's artwork and family photos that told the story of a life built around love rather than money. Emma perked up considerably when she met Catherine, clearly intrigued by this blonde woman who'd brought magical soup and spoke to her like an equal, rather than talking down to her the way many adults did. "Daddy says you used to be his boss," Emma said from her nest of blankets on the couch. "But now you're friends." Catherine glanced at Marcus, something unreadable passing between them. "That's right. Your dad is very wise, and I needed some wisdom." "He's the wisest," Emma agreed seriously. "He knows everything about everything. Well, except girl hair. He's terrible at ponytails." Catherine laughed, the sound filling the apartment with warmth. "I happen to be excellent at ponytails. Maybe I could teach him sometime." As Emma ate her soup and color returned to her cheeks, Catherine helped Marcus tidy the kitchen, moving around the small space with surprising ease. She seemed genuinely comfortable in the domestic environment, asking questions about Emma's school and interests with the focus she'd once brought to quarterly earnings reports. "She's incredible," Catherine said quietly as they watched Emma from the kitchen. "So bright and confident. You've done an amazing job raising her." "She makes it easy." "She's naturally sunny, like her mother was." Marcus dried a dish thoughtfully. "I worry sometimes that she's missing out by not having a mom. Other kids talk about mother-daughter things, shopping trips, that kind of stuff." "Does she ever mention it?" "Occasionally. She asked me last month why some families have moms and some don't. I told her that families come in all different shapes, and what matters is having people who love you." Marcus hung up the dish towel. "But I know there are things I can't teach her, experiences I can't give her." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, I had a mother who was physically present but emotionally unavailable my entire childhood. She was more concerned with social appearances than actually connecting with me. Emma has something much more valuable than a mother who's just going through the motions. She has a father who loves her completely and shows up for her every single day. The conversation was interrupted by Emma calling from the living room. "Catherine, do you want to see my favorite movie? Daddy says it's okay if you want to stay." Catherine looked at Marcus questioningly, and he nodded. "Fair warning, it's an animated movie about a princess who talks to animals. You might not find it as engaging as quarterly board meetings." "I think I'm ready for something different from quarterly board meetings," Catherine replied with a smile. They settled on the couch with Emma between them, her head resting against Marcus's shoulder, while she provided running commentary on the movie's plot points for Catherine's benefit. Halfway through the film, Emma fell asleep, her small hand somehow finding Catherine's and holding on. Marcus started to move Emma to her bedroom, but Catherine whispered, "Let her stay. She's comfortable." So they sat there in the dim light from the television, Emma sleeping peacefully between them, and Marcus found himself studying Catherine's profile as she watched the movie with genuine attention. This was the woman the board had deemed unfit for leadership, but Marcus saw someone who'd spent an evening caring for a sick child she barely knew, someone who'd made soup from scratch and asked thoughtful questions about ponytails and school projects. "Thank you," he said softly. "For the soup, for staying, for caring about Emma." "You didn't have to do any of this." Catherine turned to look at him, her expression serious in the flickering light. "Yes, I did. You both have given me something I didn't know I was missing." "What's that?" "A reason to think about someone other than myself. A glimpse of what really matters." She gestured around the cozy apartment. "This is what success actually looks like, Marcus. Not corner offices or stock options. This." 2 weeks after that movie night, Marcus received a phone call that would change everything. He was finishing his shift at Sterling Holdings when his phone rang with Catherine's number, but her voice sounded different, excited, almost breathless. "Marcus, I need to see you. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow? I have something incredible to tell you." The next afternoon, Marcus arrived at Murphy's Coffee House to find Catherine already there. But she wasn't alone. A distinguished older man with silver hair and kind eyes sat across from her, and they both stood when Marcus approached. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Dr. James Chen, my former professor from Harvard Business School and current head of the Chen Foundation." Catherine's eyes were bright with an excitement Marcus hadn't seen before. "Dr. Chen, this is Marcus Thompson, the man I've been telling you about." Dr. Chen extended his hand with a warm smile. "Catherine has told me remarkable things about you, Marcus. Your insights into leadership, your perspective on what makes organizations truly successful. I'm very impressed." Marcus shook the man's hand, confused. "I'm not sure what Catherine's told you, but I think there might be some misunderstanding about my qualifications." "On the contrary, Doctor," Chen said as they all sat down. "Catherine has painted a picture of someone who understands the human element of business in ways that most MBA graduates never grasp. That's exactly what we're looking for." Catherine leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Marcus, remember how you told me I should figure out what I want to build next? Well, I have. Dr. Chen and I are launching a new kind of business school, one that focuses on sustainable leadership, emotional intelligence, and creating companies that serve their communities, not just their shareholders." "Yes, revolutionary, Dr. Chen added. "We're calling it the Institute for Conscious Leadership. Traditional business education has created a generation of executives who know how to maximize profits but not how to lead people. We want to change that." Marcus looked between them, still not understanding his role in this conversation. "That sounds amazing, but I'm not sure why you're telling me about it." Catherine's smile was radiant. "Because we want you to be our first director of community integration. You'd help design curriculum that bridges the gap between theoretical leadership concepts and real-world application. You'd teach executives how to see their employees as whole people, not just human resources." "Teach executives," Marcus laughed, but it came out hollow. "Catherine, I'm a maintenance worker. I don't have credentials to teach anyone anything." "How you have something better than credentials, Doctor," Chen interjected. "You have wisdom earned through real experience." You understand what it's like to balance work and family responsibilities, to make decisions based on values rather than just profit margins. That's what we need. Catherine reached across the table and touched Marcus's hand. You told me once that you wanted to teach. This would be teaching, Marcus. Teaching the people who make decisions that affect thousands of lives. Teaching them what you taught me about seeing people as human beings first. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were proposing. Even if I could do something like that, the salary would have to be significant enough to support Emma and me. I can't take risks with her financial security. Dr. Chen smiled. The starting salary would be $120,000 annually, with full benefits and a flexible schedule that would allow you to be present for Emma's important moments. We believe that leaders who understand work-life balance create better organizations. The number took Marcus's breath away. It was more than triple what he currently made from all his jobs combined. But even more appealing was the idea of using his experiences to help other people lead with compassion and wisdom. There's more, Catherine added. The Institute is partnering with Boston University to offer graduate credit for all our courses. You'd be working toward your master's degree in organizational leadership while you teach. Everything you've always wanted to do, Marcus. Teaching, learning, making a real difference in how businesses treat people. Marcus sat back in his chair, trying to process the opportunity they were offering. 6 months ago, he'd been invisible to Catherine Sterling. Now she was offering him a career that seemed too good to be true. Why me? He asked quietly. You could hire anyone. People with advanced degrees, corporate experience, published research. Catherine's expression grew serious. Because you carried your drunk boss home when you could have walked away. Because you see people, Marcus. Really see them. Because you understand that leadership isn't about commanding from above. It's about lifting people up from beside them. Dr. Chen nodded. Catherine shared the story of how you helped her through her darkest professional moment, how you treated her with dignity when others would have seen only scandal or opportunity. That's the kind of character we want shaping future leaders. What about Emma? Marcus asked, his practical concerns surfacing. My daughter has to be my first priority. She'd be welcome at the Institute, Catherine said immediately. We're designing family-friendly policies because we believe leaders who are good parents make better executives. Emma could do homework in your office, attend Institute events designed for families. We want to demonstrate that supporting employees' personal lives creates better professional outcomes. Marcus thought about Emma, about the opportunities this position could create for her future. The financial security, the example it would set about following dreams, even when they seemed impossible, the chance to show her that good people sometimes get rewarded for doing good work. When would this start? He asked. September, Dr. Chen replied. That gives us 6 months to finalize the curriculum and prepare the facility. Plenty of time for you to transition from your current work and for us to handle any certification requirements. Catherine pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. This is just a preliminary offer, but I wanted you to see that we're serious. Look it over. Think about it. Talk to Emma. This isn't just a job offer, Marcus. It's a chance to change how business leaders think about their responsibility to the people they lead. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Emma. The job offer spread between them. She'd listened with wide eyes as he explained what the Institute would do and how he might be part of it. So you'd be like a teacher for grown-ups? She asked, her forehead wrinkled in concentration. Sort of. I'd help people who run companies learn how to treat their workers better, how to make decisions that help everyone, not just the people at the top. Emma nodded solemnly. Like how you always tell me to think about how my choices affect other people. Exactly like that. And Catherine would be there too? Marcus smiled at his daughter's perceptive question. Over the past few weeks, Catherine had become a regular presence in their lives, joining them for dinners and weekend activities with such natural ease that Emma had started referring to her as almost family. Yes, Catherine would be there too. She'd be one of the leaders of the Institute. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Daddy, do you love Catherine?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard, but he'd always been honest with Emma about important things. "I think I do, sweetheart." "How would you feel about that?" Emma considered this seriously. "I think Mom would want you to be happy, and Catherine makes you smile the way you do in the old pictures with Mom. Plus, she's really good at ponytails and she always listens to my stories." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. His 8-year-old daughter had just given him permission to move forward with his life, to embrace the possibility of love and partnership he'd thought was permanently closed to him. "What do you think about the job?" he asked. "It would mean some big changes for us." "Good changes," Emma said confidently. "You'd be helping people and teaching, which is what you always wanted to do, and we'd have enough money for me to take art classes and for you to not look worried when bills come." 3 days later, Marcus called Catherine with his answer. "I'll take the position." "And Catherine, thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't know was there." "Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like," she replied, "for teaching me that the best leaders are the ones who lead with their hearts as much as their heads." The first semester at the Institute for Conscious Leadership exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus found himself energized in ways he'd never experienced, working with executives who were hungry to learn more sustainable approaches to leadership. His sessions on leading through crisis and the human cost of business decisions became the most requested courses in the program. Catherine thrived as executive director, channeling her business expertise into creating an organization that practiced what it preached. She implemented policies that supported working parents, created mentorship programs that crossed traditional hierarchies, and insisted that the Institute's own culture reflect the values they were teaching. Emma flourished too, spending after-school hours at the Institute where she became the unofficial mascot for several leadership cohorts. Executives would seek her opinion on family-friendly policies, and she provided feedback with the serious consideration of someone who understood she was contributing to important work. 6 months after the Institute opened, Marcus and Catherine were working late, reviewing applications for the next semester's fellowship program. Emma was asleep on the couch in Catherine's office, covered by a blanket they kept specifically for her visits. "Look at this application," Catherine said, sliding a folder across to Marcus. "Single mother, working 3 jobs, brilliant ideas about inclusive leadership, but no formal business education. She's exactly the kind of person traditional programs would overlook." Marcus read through the application, noting the woman's insights about balancing multiple responsibilities while maintaining empathy for others facing similar challenges. "She reminds me of someone I know," he said with a smile. "Who?" "You. When you were sitting on that office floor, thinking you'd lost everything that mattered. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who've been broken and rebuilt themselves stronger." Catherine moved around the desk to stand beside Marcus's chair. Over the past year, their relationship had deepened from friendship to partnership to something that felt like coming home. They'd been careful with Emma, making sure she was comfortable with each step of their growing closeness. "I have something to tell you," Catherine said, her voice carrying the same excitement she'd had when proposing the Institute. "The Chen Foundation wants to expand our program nationally. 5 new locations over the next 3 years. Marcus looked up at her with pride. "That's incredible. You're going to change how business is done across the country." "We're going to change it," Catherine corrected. "I can't do this without you, Marcus. I don't want to do any of it without you." She knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "I love you. I love Emma. I love the family we've become together. Will you marry me?" Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. He'd never imagined that the woman he'd helped home from her office one night would become the person he couldn't imagine living without. "Are you sure?" "We come with complications. Emma will always be my first priority, and I'll never be the kind of husband who puts his career above his family." Catherine's smile was radiant. "That's exactly why I want to marry you. Because you understand what really matters. because you showed me that love and success aren't mutually exclusive. They're actually dependent on each other." From the couch, Emma's sleepy voice interrupted them. "Are you proposing, Catherine? Because Daddy always told me that when people love each other enough to be a family, they should make it official." Catherine laughed, turning to include Emma in the conversation. "What do you think, Em? Should your dad and I get married?" Emma sat up, suddenly wide awake. "Only if I can help plan the wedding, and only if we get a dog. Married people with kids always have dogs in movies." Marcus gathered both of them in his arms, overwhelmed by the completeness of this moment. A year ago, he'd been a single father working multiple jobs to make ends meet, invisible to the world around him. Now he was engaged to a woman who saw his worth, building a career that mattered, raising a daughter who understood that families came in all shapes and forms. The wedding took place 6 months later in the garden behind the Institute, surrounded by family, friends, and the first graduating class of conscious leaders. Emma served as maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd helped design and carrying a bouquet she'd picked from their own garden. In his speech, Marcus talked about how the best things in life often came from the most unexpected places, how helping someone else in their darkest moment could lead to your own brightest future, how love multiplied when it was shared rather than hoarded. Catherine spoke about learning that true leadership began with vulnerability, with admitting when you needed help and accepting it when it was offered, about finding strength in partnership rather than isolation. Emma, not to be outdone, gave her own speech about how sometimes families were born and sometimes they were built, but they were always made stronger by choosing each other every single day. As the celebration continued into the evening, Marcus and Catherine danced on the small stage that had been set up for the occasion. Around them, executives from their program danced with their own families, putting into practice the work-life integration they'd learned at the Institute. "Any regrets?" Catherine asked as they swayed to the music. Marcus looked over her shoulder at Emma, who was teaching a group of serious business leaders how to do the chicken dance. "Only that it took a drunk night in your office for us to find each other," Catherine laughed. "Sometimes the best journeys start with the worst moments. Besides, I prefer to think of it as the night you carried me home, in more ways than one." They danced in comfortable silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. "You know what the best part is? We're just getting started. The Institute, our marriage, watching Emma grow up. All of it. All of it," Catherine agreed, pulling him closer. "Though I think we should probably get that dog Emma mentioned. Apparently it's a requirement for properly married people with children." Marcus laughed, spinning Catherine once before pulling her back into his arms. Around them, their chosen family celebrated a love story that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into something that was changing not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. The Institute for Conscious Leadership would go on to graduate thousands of leaders who understood that true success was measured not just in profit margins, but in the positive impact they had on the people whose lives they influenced. And at its heart would always be the story of a single father who saw past titles and appearances to the human being beneath, and a successful woman who learned that the greatest achievement was building a life filled with love and purpose. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simple decision to help someone who needs it, without expecting anything in return. Sometimes carrying someone home, whether literally or figuratively, is the first step toward finding your own way home. 5 years later, Marcus stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School, delivering the keynote address at their annual Leadership Excellence Conference. The room was filled with current CEOs, rising executives, and business school students, all eager to hear from the man whose unconventional approach to leadership development had transformed corporate culture across multiple industries. 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the large space. I was a night shift maintenance worker who cleaned offices and emptied trash cans. I was invisible to most of the people whose workspaces I maintained. But one night, I encountered someone who needed help, and that decision to help changed both our lives forever. In the front row, Catherine sat with Emma, now 13, and already showing signs of the leadership qualities that would one day make her formidable in whatever field she chose. Emma still insisted on attending Marcus's major speaking engagements, claiming she was his good luck charm, though everyone knew she simply enjoyed seeing her father recognized for the brilliant educator he'd become. "The woman I helped that night taught me something crucial," Marcus continued. "She taught me that vulnerability and strength aren't opposites, they're partners. The strongest leaders are those brave enough to admit when they need help, and wise enough to accept it when it's offered." The audience was completely engaged, hanging on every word, as Marcus shared lessons learned from years of teaching executives how to lead with both competence and compassion. His programs had produced leaders who reported higher employee satisfaction, lower turnover rates, and more sustainable business practices than their traditionally trained counterparts. True leadership isn't about commanding from a corner office. It's about understanding that every decision you make affects real people with real families, real dreams, real challenges. It's about remembering that behind every employee ID badge is a human being trying to build a meaningful life. After the presentation, as Marcus mingled with conference attendees, he was approached by a young woman who reminded him of Catherine at that age, brilliant and driven, but carrying the weight of enormous expectations. "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand, "I'm Sarah Chen, Doctor, Chen's daughter. I'm starting my MBA here next fall, and I wanted to thank you. Your work at the Institute helped my father remember why he went into education in the first place. Family dinners got a lot more interesting once he started implementing your family-first policies at the foundation." Marcus smiled, thinking of how many similar conversations he'd had over the years. The ripple effects of the Institute's work continued to spread, touching families and communities far beyond the corporate boardrooms where their graduates worked. That evening, back home in their expanded house, which now included the dog Emma had insisted upon, a golden retriever named Wisdom, who had become the unofficial therapy dog for stressed Institute participants, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Catherine was in her study, reviewing applications for the Institute's new international expansion into London and Tokyo. Emma was at the kitchen table, working on a social studies project about leadership through history, occasionally asking for input from both her parents about different leadership styles. "Dad," Emma called out, "for my project, can you tell me again about the night you met Catherine?" "The real version, not the romantic version you tell at weddings." Marcus laughed, settling beside his daughter at the table. "The real version is that I found someone having the worst night of her life, and instead of walking away, I decided to help. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is simply show up and remind them they're not alone." "And that's how you carried her home," Emma said sagely, even though she was already there. Catherine appeared in the doorway, drawn by their conversation. "Your father," she said, joining them at the table, "taught me that home isn't a place. It's the people who see you at your worst and choose to stay anyway." As they sat together, helping Emma with her project about leaders who change the world through small acts of kindness, Marcus marveled at how a single decision to help a stranger had created not just a love story, but a legacy that would continue influencing how people treated each other in workplaces and communities for generations to come. The three of them, plus Wisdom sprawled contentedly at their feet, represented something revolutionary in a world that often valued profit over people. They were living proof that success measured in love, compassion, and positive impact was not only possible, but infinitely more satisfying than any corner office or stock portfolio could ever be.